Welcome to the Explainer. Now, I want you to think about your monthly water bill for a second. Look closely, way past that total amount due at the bottom. Have you ever actually scrutinized those little line items and wondered, what exactly am I funding here? Well, today we are unpacking a monumental Supreme Court decision. This is a case that exposes a decades-long failure of infrastructure, a massive breach of public trust, and a staggering financial penalty that literally shook the Philippine water utility industry to its core.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Millions of consumers pay a sewerage charge or an environmental charge every single month. I mean, it sounds responsible, right? You pay the fee and the utility company safely manages your wastewater. Simple. But what happens when you pay and the infrastructure simply isn't built? That exact question is what triggered this massive legal battle.
To really grasp the stakes here, we have to look at how the Supreme Court views this resource. They stated, water is not a mere commodity for sale and consumption, but a natural asset to be protected. You see, this isn't just about corporate bottom lines. It's the philosophical foundation of our survival. Water is our most vital resource, so protecting it is an absolute necessity, not just some corporate option. So, here's our roadmap to unpack this complex Supreme Court decision. We're going to cover 1. The water sanitation crisis. 2. The Clean Water Act. 3. The concessionaire's excuses. 4. The public trust doctrine. And finally, 5. The billion peso verdict. All right, Section 1. The water sanitation crisis. A sinking reality.
To understand exactly why the law came down so incredibly hard, we have to look at the grim reality that citizens were actually enduring. The health risks of untreated waste are, frankly, terrifying. Legislative records revealed that an estimated 80% of all illnesses in developing countries are waterborne. 80%. Without proper sewerage, human waste literally seeps into underground aquifers, which creates this invisible but absolutely deadly health crisis, especially in densely populated areas.
And where does all this untreated waste eventually go? Well, it flows directly into river tributaries like Makayan, Marilao, and Obando, and it ultimately empties right into Manila Bay. In fact, during the drafting of these environmental laws, lawmakers actually described Manila Bay as the widest septic tank ever made by Filipinos. It's a shocking image for sure, but that was the reality. Domestic and industrial waste from faulty or non-existent sewage systems was just being dumped directly into the environment.
Moving on to Section 2, the Clean Water Act, a ticking clock. Facing this catastrophic pollution, the government finally passed a landmark law in 2004. The centerpiece here is Section 8 of the Clean Water Act. It mandated that water agencies and private concessionaires had to connect existing sewage lines to an available sewage system. And here is the kicker. They were given a strict deadline of 5 years from when the law took effect. And this brilliantly illustrates how the law created a strict, undeniable mandate. The clock was officially ticking.
So let's look at how this timeline played out. The law was passed in 2004. Fast forward to 2009, and that 5-year deadline expires. The finding? The companies had blatantly failed to build the necessary facilities. This massive failure sparked a legal battle that dragged on for a whole decade, finally culminating in the 2019 Supreme Court decision.
Section 3. The concessionaire's excuses. Defense versus reality.
Now, when they were fined, Manila Water, and the MWSS didn't just accept it. They fought back with a whole series of excuses. Their first major defense? A legal technicality. They basically said, hey, we must wait for the DPWH's national program under Section 7 first. But the Supreme Court completely rejected this. They stated that Section 8 is a mandatory, unconditional duty demandable at once. One is absolutely not a condition precedent for the other.
Their second defense was honestly even bolder. They argued that their private concession agreements gave them an extension all the way out to 2037. Think about that. But the court's response was swift and decisive. The reality is, a private contract cannot override a public environmental law. You can't just sign a private document with yourselves to excuse yourselves from a mandate passed by Congress. No way.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer reality of the numbers on the ground. By their own admission, progress was just dismal. Take Maynilad sewage coverage as of 2017. This is 13 years after the Clean Water Act passed. They had attained only 13% sewage coverage. That means a staggering 87% of their customers remained entirely unserved. This data exposes the failure far better than any legal argument ever could.
And here is where it really hits you, the consumer, directly in the wallet. While these massive infrastructure delays were happening, the concessionaires were still levying their fees. Customers were being billed 20% for an environmental charge, and sometimes billed up to 30% for a sewerage charge. The court pointed out this glaring unfairness. I mean, the companies faithfully collected the money, yet there were massive delays in the infrastructure those fees were meant to fund.
This brings us to Section 4, the Public Trust Doctrine, Protecting the Future.
To ensure that utility companies couldn't just brush off these environmental laws, the court invoked a really powerful philosophical backbone. It's called the Public Trust Doctrine. This essentially dictates that vital natural resources, like water, are so inherently important that they can't be fully privately owned. Instead, the state acts as a trustee, managing these vital resources for the benefit of both current and future generations.
So here's how this trust relationship actually works in practice. It's kind of like a giant puzzle. The state acts as the trustee, managing the resource. The citizens, that's us, are the beneficiaries. And because the state outsources the actual water distribution, the private concessionaires step into the role of delegated protectors. By accepting the franchise to supply water, these companies are legally bound to protect the public interest. They aren't just there to seek a profit. They are obligated to protect the citizenry and prevent pollution because they've been entrusted with a resource that literally belongs to everyone.
And finally, Section 5, the billion peso verdict, accountability delivered.
Because the water concessionaires blatantly violated that 5-year deadline, the Supreme Court dropped the hammer. And I mean, they dropped it hard. The penalty was completely unprecedented. The court finalized an initial fine of exactly 921,464,184 pesos against Manilad, and the exact same amount against Manila Water. And the MWSS was held jointly liable. To put that into perspective, that is nearly 1 billion pesos per concessionaire for a decade of non-compliance.
But wait, the financial penalties didn't even stop there. Because the pollution was ongoing, the court ordered that from the finality of the decision onward, the companies would be fined an additional 322,102 pesos every single day. Every single day. And by law, that daily fine increases by 10% every 2 years to account for inflation, accruing daily until they fully comply with the sewage connection mandate.
So, the crucial point is this. Strict compliance is mandatory, and time is of the essence. Environmental laws are not mere suggestions to be negotiated in private boardrooms. The Supreme Court made it unequivocally clear that the health of the public and the preservation of our waterways take absolute precedence of our corporate convenience.
The Clean Water Act laid down the rules, and the Supreme Court enforced them with one of the most significant environmental penalties in history. But as these companies continue the massive, expensive work of retrofitting an entire metropolis with proper sewerage, we have to ask ourselves, are massive financial fines enough to truly protect our most vital natural resource for future generations? Or is the damage to the public trust already done? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep asking questions about the world around you.